It's the home of a mystical band. High in the summer you can hear them greet their fans. Here in the hollows where the grass is sweet, playing songs full of musical jam. The old mama hummers are gigging in the sand. So what did you hear? What was the sound that invited your ears? I heard the humming of the Let It Bees, show-stopping, buzzing, making tunes so expertly. High in the summer, would you believe? I heard the humming of the Let It Bees. Crowds are uniting on the village green as the bees sing their honeydew lines. Caught in the summer with melodies so fine. So what did you hear? What was the sound that excited your ears? I heard the humming of the Let It Bees, show-stopping, buzzing, making tunes so expertly. High in the summer, would you believe? I heard the humming of the Let It Bees. I heard the strumming of the Let It Bees. So what did you hear? What was the sound that delighted your ears? I heard the humming of the Let It Bees, show-stopping, buzzing, making tunes so expertly. High in the summer, would you believe? I heard the humming of the Let It Bees. I heard the humming of the Let It Bees, show-stopping, buzzing, making tunes so expertly. High in the summer, would you believe? I heard the humming of the Let It Bees. I heard the bees humming Let It Be. Let It Be. Let It Be. Let It be like it's meant to be. Let It be. Let It be.
So that was Let It Be by Rockford's Rock Opera. And coming up now is an extract from the podcast series Stories, Science and Secrets, which will be launching on all good podcast channels in September 2023. And it was this interview with a scientist from the Natural History Museum which, as you'll hear, inspired the song.
Hello, I'm Dr. Abigail Lowe. I'm Community Science Officer at the Natural History Museum in London. I actually work in helping other people get into science, so people without necessarily any scientific training can come and join in on projects, and we call that community science, so I work in the community science team.
So you work a lot with insects, is that right?
Yeah, I've been working on insects for quite a number of years now, and our newest community science project has been co-designed with students. And one of the questions that they wanted to ask and answer was how noise pollution affects insects.
And so before we talk about the noise, what is it that makes insects so important?
So insects are really important for maintaining a healthy ecosystem. They've got lots of different roles in the environment, but the main one that we tend to think of is pollination. So transferring pollen from one plant to the other and enabling it to reproduce. A lot of plants are in our diet, so that helps us to get things like strawberries, apples and raspberries, but also coffee and chocolate.
Which Elaine is particularly grateful for.
Yeah, we need those pollinators.
When we were talking earlier, you were telling us how insects communicate with one another.
Yeah, so lots of insects communicate with each other, and they usually do this through vibrations, so they can rub different parts of their body together to produce sounds. For example, grasshoppers rub their legs against their wing, and crickets rub their wings together, and these make a sound.
And I know there's other ways that insects use to communicate.
They can also communicate through pheromones, so special smells that might be specific to certain insects. And honeybees in particular have a dance that they do when they come back to the hive called a waggle dance. And this is a movement that they make to communicate where the pollen and nectar are and how much of it there is.
So if insects are living in noisy places, could that be a problem?
We know that the noises that insects make to communicate are really important to find each other, to attract mates and warn that predators might be around. But we don't know what impact other noises in the environment has on them. There actually has been one study that looked at the songs that grasshoppers were emitting, and they found that the ones by roads were different to the ones which weren't, which meant that they were changing the way they communicated.
It sounds like you're saying that insects in cities are sort of talking more loudly than insects in the quiet of the countryside. Is that right?
Well, we don't really know. They could be a slightly different frequency, being louder. It's just something that we're keen to find out.
So it could be a bit like people in big cities like London and New York all shouting at each other.
But weirdly, that is really true. I spoke to a speech coach once who said that posh people talk quietly because they lived in great big houses in the middle of the countryside and they were used to being listened to, so they never had to raise their voices. Whereas people who lived in cities, particularly in the 19th century when they were working in cotton mills, and really loud places, they had to shout. So people from Manchester would shout all the time, and people in the country would just sort of, could you pass the sugar?
So tell us a bit about what you're going to study.
People know that birds can be identified through their songs, but the same is true for insects as well. And so if we can record the sound of insects in the environment, then we can look back at that recording and see what was there. And that can help us to monitor what their distribution is.
And you've got specialists at the museum working on this.
We've got a scientist at the museum called Ed Baker. He is an acoustic biology researcher, which means he delves into the sound of nature. And he is working with computer algorithms, so some codes on the computer that can help him to automatically detect what wildlife is in the sound recordings.
And what are you trying to find out from these recordings?
As I mentioned, we really don't know much about how noise impacts insects, and they're really important in the environment. So if noise is having an effect on them, then it could be contributing to their decline or maybe changing the habitats that they live in. For example, insects might be avoiding noisier habitats. So if we can find out how noise is impacting insects across the country, then we can really start to get a better idea, and that can help us to make roads better for nature, which is one of the main questions of this project.
So I know you want to get as many people as possible to join in your research. What can we all do?
The main activity we're asking people to do is to pick a road or a street to survey, maybe one that people use every day they're familiar with, to record the audio for 5 minutes. So this will capture both the sound of nature and also human-generated noise as well, so things like traffic. And then to walk along the road for 10 metres and to record any insects that they might see. And then once people have made their audio recording and written down their observations, they can submit them to us online and we can look at all of the data together and help us look at trends.
That's brilliant. And I know this is part of a wider project at the museum?
So this is part of the Urban Nature Project to get people living in urban environments more connected to nature. Part of this project is redeveloping the gardens around the museum at South Kensington.
OK, back to the recordings that you want people to do. Just to finish off, when do you want people to make these recordings?
We ask people to do the survey between 10 and 4 p.m, between March and October, just when you tend to see insects, really.
So there we are. That was the interview on Stories, Science and Secrets podcast, which led to the song. We literally went outside in the garden to record some insects and came back humming a tune, and that tune became Let It Be. If you'd like to know more about the project, simply Google Nature Overheard. That's Nature Overheard, and that will take you to the Natural History Museum page, which will tell you all about what to do. And perhaps, like us, you'll make a recording and be inspired not only to support the Natural History Museum and its work, but also maybe to write a song or a poem or a symphony. Anyway, thanks for listening. And look out for Stories, Science and Secrets on all the main podcast platforms from September 2023.